So good afternoon, everyone. We're very pleased to welcome Susan Thornton, who is the Acting Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs, back to the New York Foreign Press Center. I have a few housekeeping items before we start. Please take a moment to silence your cell phones. At the conclusion of Ms. Thornton's remarks, we'll open the floor to questions. When you receive the microphone, please state your name and your media affiliation. Today's briefing is on the record, and with that, let me turn the podium over to Ms. Thornton. Thank you again.
Good afternoon, everyone. Great to be here in New York this week. We're nearing the end of a very busy UNGA week, and we've had a lot of engagements, of course, during the time that we've been here. We've had the president here for an unprecedented level of activity and engagement at the UN, a number of UN events, multilateral, bilateral events, and the Secretary of State is, of course, still here, continuing with his program this afternoon, continuing with meetings. Of course, we've had a lot of interactions with our counterparts in the Asia-Pacific region while we've been here this week at various levels, and we've had many chances to discuss the priority issues and regional security challenges and other challenges that we share. Of course, our highest priority issue this week has been the issue of the DPRK and their illegal missile and nuclear programs. We've had a number of discussions regarding this issue with a lot of different counterparts and in various formats. We had, of course, yesterday's announcement by Treasury Secretary Mnuchin of the new executive order that the president had signed regarding new authorities for the Treasury Department to pursue illicit financial transactions by, sanctioning entities and financial institutions that engage in transactions with North Korea's illicit weapons programs and other trading operations. And at the same time, we have been making clear this week that the United States does seek a peaceful resolution to the DPRK nuclear and missile issue. The DPRK's rhetoric and illegal missile launches and nuclear tests will not make that country more secure. Of course, the opposite is true. The DPRK's actions will also prevent the country from developing its economy and improving the lives of its people. The international community will never accept the DPRKs as a nuclear-armed state, which is Pyongyang's stated goal. And unfortunately, despite our efforts to reach a point where the DPRK would engage in serious negotiations, their belligerent and provocative behavior has demonstrated that they're not interested, at least at this point, in working toward a peaceful solution. I think that DPRK has a choice. It needs to give up its nuclear weapons and join the community of nations, or the regime will continue to condemn its people to poverty and isolation. So that is my opening statement, and I'd be happy to take some questions from anyone.
Thank you. I'm Eugene Yuan, correspondent from Kyodo News. I have a question about DPRK. South Korea government announced humanitarian aid to North Korea on this week. So can you support this idea and decision? So the decision has not yet, but there is many concern about the DPRK.
So we have been working on this issue of DPRK, illegal nuclear and missile programs, for many, many decades. During that time, there has been underway an effort by the international community to make sure that the belligerent and illicit behavior by the regime in Pyongyang does not unduly punish or affect the people of North Korea. And so there are a number of UN agencies that continue to work in North Korea, continue to make very concerted efforts to make sure that we can get needed humanitarian assistance directly to the North Korean people, and we've made strenuous efforts over the years to make sure that we can monitor that aid to make sure that it is going directly into the hands of the people that need it. So I'm not sure exactly what the details are of the discussions that have occurred on this issue between the South Koreans and other agencies, but I know that a number of countries continue to respond to appeals from the different UN agencies to make sure that we can mitigate the effects of the illegal programs of the government on the common people.
Rita Shah, BBC News. Kim Jong-un of North Korea has responded to this week's speech from the president and the tightening of sanctions by saying that North Korea will take the highest level of hardline countermeasures in history. Does this suggest to you that the US strategy is working? And a second question, if I may. President Trump has said on Tuesday that he described Mr. Kim as Rocket Man is on a suicide mission. What's meant by this? That the US will destroy North Korea?
Okay, to take the second question maybe first, I think what the president said was that the North Koreans appear to be on a mission to attack or to engage in some kind of provocation or military sort of display aimed at the United States and or our allies, and that if that was to be the case, that the U.S. would be prepared to respond and to respond overwhelmingly in order to protect our interests. So I think it's important to realize that there was a statement about a response to an attack from North Korea or a provocation from North Korea that was at issue there. The North Koreans have responded in a way misquoting what was said and with their own sort of belligerent rhetoric. And I think, I don't know whether the rhetoric means that the strategy that we have is working, but certainly we see the North Koreans be continually, increasingly isolated, and that they are feeling that isolation. They are seeing the effect of the sanctions that the international community has put in place, 2 unanimously approved UN Security Council resolutions, an overwhelmingly large portion of their export trade be put under effective block by the UN Security Council and their export destination partners. And I think they are certainly feeling a lot of pressure, and I can't read the mind of Kim Jong-un, so I'm not sure whether it's in direct response to what we're doing, but I think it's reasonable to assess that it is in response to the pressure they're feeling and the pretty unanimous condemnation from the international community that they're facing.
Alicia Rose with NHK. So you said that you don't know whether the rhetoric of Kim Jong-un's statement means that the strategy is working. Can you clarify that a bit? And then also specifically on the threat of North Korea to detonate a hydrogen bomb in the Pacific Ocean, how is the U.S. prepared to respond?
Well, what I meant by I can't tell whether Kim Jong-un's statement means is it's hard. I can't psychoanalyze Kim Jong-un, so I can't get inside his mind to know what the intention was behind their statement. All we can see is what the statement says. So I assess that the statement and the other signs that we're seeing of North Korea feeling the pressure means that the strategy of increasing pressure on the regime is having an effect on them. What we want to do, remember, and the strategy is to increase the pressure, increase diplomatic isolation, increase our deterrence, our military deterrence, in order to get the regime in Pyongyang to engage meaningfully in a discussion of denuclearization, which is the goal of the international community in this engagement and in this strategy. So I think we see these responses in North Korea. We see them feeling the pressure. We haven't yet seen them give a signal that they are ready to engage in meaningful negotiations on denuclearization and rolling back their provocative behavior and their illicit programs. On the question about I think it was what did you call it? The hydrogen bomb. Yeah, I mean, obviously such an action would be an unprecedented act of aggression by North Korea and would demand an international response.
And specifically, how is the U.S. prepared to respond?
Well, I don't want to go into speculation on sort of the hypothetical response, but I think the entire international community and not just the U.S., I mean, this would be an unprecedented act and would be real outrageous behavior on their part. So I don't want to speculate. I certainly hope that they would not engage in that behavior, but I'm sure there will be a very concerted and determined international response to such an act.
Let's go to the front row with Ahmed.
Thank you very much. My name is Ahmed Fatih from ATN News. On behalf of multiple international media outlets, I'll be asking the following couple of questions, if you allow me. First, as you said, the belligerent and illicit behavior of Kim Jong-un is causing him isolation. He continuing on a path to acquire nuclear weapons if he have not acquired it yet. What is the measures that can curb this ongoing process? He did not budge for a minute on it, and he's going and doing one provocation after the other. The second part is that when he conducted the long-range ballistic missile testing, he violated the territorial water of Japan as well as their airspace. Why the U.S. military present in Japan and the Japanese military, whom they have the hardware to counter that, why did not shoot the missile down while it was in their territory? Thank you.
So, well, the first question is a very difficult question. We've been wrestling with the problem of this illegal nuclear program in North Korea for quite some time. I myself worked on this problem back in the 90s and was involved in it in the 2000s. The last two times we had negotiations on this program. And unfortunately, we have not been able to get the North Koreans to abide by any of the agreements that they have signed up to in the past, and we have not been able to, get this program eliminated in the way that we've been seeking. You asked, what can change the course of this program? What can stop him? How can we keep him from doing this? I mean, that is exactly what the strategy that we've devised together with all of our international partners is aimed at, bringing unprecedented kind of pressure on the regime. Kim Jong-un's purpose in trying to achieve this nuclear weapon is obviously to fulfill a long time desire on the part of the North Korean regime to reunify the Korean Peninsula under the Kim family regime and to proliferate these weapons, blackmail other countries, and this is an intolerable prospect that no country in the international community can abide, and that is why it's absolutely imperative that we make sure that we can succeed in getting him to the table to negotiate a way forward for both his country, his people, the security of his regime, which is not being enhanced by this weapons program. It will lead to certain insecurity for the country and for his regime, and certainly will not lead to any positive future prospects for the people of North Korea. So I think this pressure, we have unprecedented ratcheting up of sanctions in the last couple of months. We're working to implement the sanctions regime. We had UN Security Council 2371 resolution, which involved banning things like seafood and other exports from North Korea. We barely had time to start implementing that one when we had the nuclear test. Then we had in record succession UN Security Council Resolution 2375. Both of these resolutions unanimously passed by the UN Security Council. The second one within a week's time of beginning negotiations. It's an unprecedented kind of coming together of the international community, blocking off a number of additional export sectors for North Korea. So we are in the process now of working with everyone to really implement these sanctions. The Treasury executive order this week was another step to try to help on the implementation and making sure there are no loopholes in the sanctions. And this sanctions net will start to tighten and be very, very difficult for the North Korean regime, and that is the idea. So, will it work? I certainly believe that it will work, and I think it's our last best chance, frankly, to solve this issue peacefully. And so that is what we're pursuing. On the second issue of the provocations that the North Koreans have unleashed and why are people not responding in kind, I think this goes to another point that's well worth making in case people have forgotten the history of the North Korean regime. There is just a litany over the last decades of provocations, heinous acts, hijacking of airplanes, blowing up of part of the South Korean cabinet in Myanmar, kidnappings, kidnapping of a South Korean movie producer taken to North Korea to make movies, etc. There's just a long list of incredibly unspeakable acts that have been committed. Sinking of a South Korean naval vessel, attacks on an island, and these things have not been responded to in kind by the international community because our focus is on defense of our allies, defense of the peace and security in the region, and we have shown a lot of restraint with regard to the regime in North Korea over the years. And I think it's quite clear that that kind of restraint and that kind of patience is nearing the end, and we see ever more provocative kinds of behavior coming, and it's just not going to be tolerated. Sure.
Within international law, I spoke specifically about violating airspace, violating territorial waters. U.S. have a long-standing defense treaty with Japan and South Korea. Why the U.S. military did not respond, why the Japanese Navy, when they have the Aegis system, also, which could have shot this missile down, did not respond. Is that restraint, accept the violation? The U.S., if it's responded, or Japan, it will be in full compliance with international law. That was my point. Thank you.
Yeah, so I understand what you're asking. The issues of international law, there have been numerous of these illegal ballistic missile launches, some of which have landed in the EEZs of other countries, particularly Japan. And, there are warnings that have gone out now in Japan that have been automatically tripped by the overflight of 2 missiles of the northern Japanese islands. So there are automatic civil warnings that go out. And I think, these are complicated matters. It's probably better if someone in the military would speak to it, but I think that it's easy to tell whether something is a test or not, and approximately where it's going to land. And so I think that's probably related to your question about when you make a decision about whether or not to take a military action. It depends a lot on the individual situation. I do know that, of course, Secretary Mattis has said that if there was a missile that was, launched at, and he was speaking in the context of the threats that were made by the North Korean regime at that time to the island of Guam in the Pacific, that if there was a missile that was shot at Guam and was heading on an attack trajectory to Guam, that we would shoot it down. So that was his quote. But again, it's probably better to talk to the people who are in charge of the military response.
Thank you. Ken Silverman, Fuji TV, Japan. You mentioned that the U.S. does seek a peaceful resolution with North Korea, and I believe a couple days ago, President Trump said, when asked if he would have direct talks with Kim Jong-un, he said, why not? I guess on the diplomatic side, is there anything, excuse me, that you can discuss in this forum that's going on that might be progressing in that direction, even on a track 2 basis? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, as I said in my sort of opening statement, we've not gotten a lot of indications from North Korea that they're serious about engaging, and a lot of our sort of attempts to open up some diplomatic space have been met by additional missile launches with longer ranges or more dramatic nuclear tests. So I think, I wouldn't want to indicate that there's anything other than that kind of a situation on the diplomatic front at the moment. I think we're still hoping and waiting for the North Koreans to respond to some of the things that have already been stated and been put out there, and to the sort of condemnation of the international community on what they're doing. I mean, we have stated openly and on the record many, many times that we're not seeking the overthrow of the regime or the collapse of the country or, accelerated reunification, et cetera. So I've made it very plain what our purpose is. It's for denuclearization. That is the focus. And so far, we've not gotten any real serious signs of response. Of course, we had some contact with the North Korean side when we were engaged in the attempts to negotiate the release of Otto Warmbier, which everyone remembers how that turned out very tragically, of course, for Otto and his family. But so it's not that we don't have a channel open through which we could receive messages or indications that the North Korean were ready to sit down and talk. That's not the issue. It's really just the matter of them not signaling in any way that they're inclined to do so.
This will be the last question.
Thank you. Manik Mehta, I'm syndicated. On the question of China, is it exercising enough influence on North Korea? That's number one. And since this is not working, as we have seen, would you not consider bringing in a third party just to help you in your negotiations? And I'm thinking of the ASEAN region. You recall a few months back, there was an incident at Kuala Lumpur airport, and Kim had his stepbrother assassinated, and that resulted in a major crisis. And it was very quickly and quietly resolved. Would something on those lines not be conceivable?
Okay, thank you. So first on the question of China, I think you've heard the president speak to this in the past and also this week. And I mentioned also the quick action in the UN Security Council, unanimous action surrounding the recent resolutions. The Treasury Secretary yesterday talked about our close cooperation with China in trying to shut down illicit proliferation networks and illicit trade. I think we have seen that China is doing more and more as time has gone on and as the North Korean behavior has gotten more provocative, more outrageous. But we still think that the pressure that China can bring to bear is going to be decisive in our international effort to increase pressure, and we are in a constant discussion with them about what more can be done, how to do it, and what kind of cooperation we can promote to make sure that that pressure is being felt through the China angle on North Korea. And we think that it's very important for China as a P5 member, a major power in the region, to step up and take as much responsibility as possible for solving and helping the international community to solve this problem. So we will continue to work with them. We've been working with them on this closely, and we will continue to do so and keep pushing them to do more. On the issue of whether or not it's working, I mean, I guess you say it's not working. I say it has to work, and it is working, so we'll see. The question of mediation, whether from ASEAN or somewhere else, it sort of goes back to the question about, diplomatic channels, whether we have them, et cetera. I mean, and we've talked to many of the countries in ASEAN this week and in Europe, et cetera. It's not really for a lack of channels that this diplomatic, engagement isn't moving forward. And, even in ASEAN, they have all worked very hard to come together to increase the pressure on North Korea to make clear that even among some of North Korea's more traditional, closer partners, they have, closed down diplomatic exchanges, cut down on trade interactions, cut down on diplomatic missions, because, they too see that the behavior has really become intolerable. So I think, it's not really that we need a mediator, it's more that we need North Korea to come to the table, to change, to make a decision to change the path and come to the table. And I hope we're getting close to that, but so far we haven't seen any tangible evidence.